Welcome to Total Retail Talks, your podcast channel for retail knowledge.
Hi, and welcome to episode 204 of Total Retail Talks. I'm Joe Keenan, Executive Editor of Total Retail. Joining me today is Mike Relich, Chief Operating Officer at Lucky Brand, a denim and fashion brand for men, women, and kids. We're going to be discussing Lucky Brand's use of predictive analytics to improve inventory allocation across channels. Thanks for joining me, Mike.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
So let's start by talking a little bit about why optimizing inventory allocation across the different channels that Lucky Brand operates is, including your local stores, is of primary interest to the brand.
Yeah, well, inventory obviously is the biggest use of working capital in any retail business, and to satisfy the customer, you need to put the right product in the right quantities in the right places, and that's obviously a big challenge. And what makes Lucky even more complicated is we have three channels. We have our outlet, retail, and e-com, and we have two DCs. So e-com is serviced from one DC, and the store is from another DC. So you can see the complexity we have there.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the challenges. Maybe you want to give an example or two of what you mean by those challenges, whether it be syncing data between the different channels. Maybe can shed a little insight on what those challenges were.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. So the fact is, we sell on our e-commerce website, we sell all our specialty product and some outlet product. And when we write a purchase order, we need to forecast what's the demand going to be for e-commerce, because that goes into a separate DC in Louisville, Kentucky, and the remainder goes to a DC in Chino, California that services our stores. So if we don't buy enough from e-com, then what happens is we could potentially lose sales, or right now about 45% of our e-commerce shipments actually come from stores. And if we have about 2.1 units per order. So if we don't allocate enough in the e-com channel, what happens is those orders will get split, and we'll split, one unit will get shipped from a store, one unit will get shipped from a DC. And not only is this a poor customer experience, them getting two packages, but it substantially increases our freight costs.
Yeah, and that poor experience, as you mentioned, so something could arrive, a couple days, prior to the other package, or, and then, there's that customer lifetime value that I would imagine is impacted there. If that customer has a poor experience, obviously the chances of them coming back and shopping with Lucky Brand again are probably diminished.
Well, absolutely. And if we ship from a DC, we can pretty much control. We know that order comes and does it get shipped. And it gets shipped, and we know what the window is from a service level point of view. If it gets shipped from a store, maybe we ship it to store one, and maybe inventory's off and we don't have it. So then it gets bumped to a second store, and it could get bumped to a third store. And each delay is probably 1 day. So the service levels and the customer experience really get diminished in that situation.
So we've kind of identified the challenges that aren't just inherent to Lucky Brand, but across all of retail, especially those that are operating in multiple channels like your brand is. So to help kind of address that, you've partnered with Select and are using its inventory optimization suite. Can you talk about why that was the right solution for Lucky Brand?
Yes. I like Select. One, it's a startup out of MIT. So they're using kind of advanced predictive and machine learning algorithms that have been developed in MIT. And what I like about it is it's instead of it just being a mechanical system that helps an analyst allocate, but using the allocators thinking and their skills, the system actually is using advanced analytics to basically drive the allocations. And what's better is that they have 4 modules. So one is called Plan. So it actually looks at your historical data and tells you where you should actually put your inventory investment. Should I be actually buying more in denim or more in knits or more in wovens? So it's telling us where the most effective place to actually go and make those inventory investments. And then there's a buy module, and the buy module is interesting because within a category, let's say it's within knits, it's going to tell me which styles I should buy in depth and which ones I should buy maybe less depth. because a lot of times merchants don't know. So what they end up doing is, I call it spreading peanut butter. They buy maybe 2,000 items of units of each item, and now some that really work, well, you end up selling out really quick and you break, and the ones that don't work, now you have a markdown liability.
Yep.
So what Select does is it actually helps us in direct to say, well, which are the styles based on this algorithms that we think they're going to do well, and helps us plan the depth of the buy. And then they have an allocate module, which a lot of times allocation systems really aren't connected to the buy. I mean, I can allocate what I have, but I can only allocate as good as I've bought. So in other words, if I didn't buy the right sizes, well, of course, I can't allocate those. Mm-hmm. So their allocation module works very, very close with their buy module to help you actually put those items in the right quantities, in the right sizes, in the particular stores and channel. And then their fulfillment module, which is very interesting, because the fact that I mentioned in my earlier statement, we ship 45% of our e-commerce from stores. Well, we need to make sure that we're shipping it from the right store, and which I'll get into in more detail. So in other words, I don't necessarily want to ship with the store that has the most inventory, because they might be the ones that actually have the highest sell-through. So I really want to ship from the store that has the lowest sell-through, and then where I have a propensity to probably take a markdown in the future, as opposed to ship it from a store that has the best probability of selling it, where I'm going to actually miss a sale if I service that e-com channel.
Yeah, and also sell it at, as you said, avoiding markdown too, by going to those more, the lower volume stores as well.
Absolutely.
So maybe you want to give us an example or two of how Lucky Brand is using Select software to rethink its approach to inventory allocation. Maybe it is kind of looking at it on a local store basis and shipping from store. You mentioned that. Some other things that you're doing with the Select software?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you two examples, and these are the primary ones where we've achieved a tremendous ROI. So one's the fulfillment module, and just to mention, when we implemented these systems, we implemented backwards. We did fulfill first, allocate second, and then we did plan and buy third. And the reason why is you plan and buy so far out that we didn't want to have to wait to get the benefits. So we knew if we put in fulfillment, we'd get immediate benefit. And then allocate, even if we had bought wrong, we could still use the allocation module to get immediate benefit. And so that was the approach we took. But with fulfillment, before we did a waterfall methodology, what we did is we said, look, can we allocate from the DC without splitting an order? If we can, great. If not, if we have to go to a store, let's just go to the closest store to the customer with the most inventory. Mm-hmm. And with Select, it actually looks in and says, well, what are your sell-throughs in weeks of supply? And what it did is it altered and started pressing orders away from a lot of the high volume stores and more toward the low volume stores. And it didn't necessarily do it across the border, because we had certain high volume stores that have very small back rooms. And so what was happening is they didn't have enough markdowns on the floor. The markdowns were actually in the back room, and of course they weren't selling. So Select noticed that and was able to say, look, you're not selling these items, let me go and give you those orders. And so we saw a total redistribution of how those orders were fulfilled or how they were allocated to each store. And to validate the ROI, we looked at and said, well, if you're taking that order away from a high volume store, did the turns slow? If the turns slowed, then that means that that inventory was being left in place. Well, we saw the turns didn't change at all on the high volume stores that we took the orders away from. And the stores where we put the orders in, actually their turns increased. So this was definite validation that it works. So that's the first example. Second example is an allocation, which what Select does, which I've seen no other system do, which is quite phenomenal, is if I look at normal systems, and I won't mention names, but you basically go in and you'll look maybe last 3 weeks of sales, and you'll have a week of supply number. You put in, and each style is allocated independent of each other. So if I have, let's say, 6 knit tops, it'll do knit top 1, and they'll figure out, okay, well, how much does each store get? And then they'll go and look at knit top 2 and do it independent of what I just allocated. What Select allows you to do is I can go and take all those 10 knit tops at once and say, hey, go allocate those. And so now it knows, well, okay, it's now allocating those in context to each style to each other. So it can go to one store and say, well, this store sells more stripes than does solids, so they would get a lot more of the stripes and maybe no solids. Another one might get maybe a few solids and a lot of stripes. And so it knows. It knows what the needs are in that store, but it's going to allocate all 10 styles in context of each other, as opposed to the traditional way, which is let me do each style in a vacuum by itself. And so this has been quite helpful for us. And the other thing it's done is that buyers like to go and buy assortments and say, well, this assortment has to represent the brand, and maybe this style is going to go to the top 50 stores, this style will go to the top 75 stores. Well, when we started looking at sell-throughs, they didn't always have the 75 stores right. They might be the top 75 stores, but maybe not for that style. So what Select does is it'll actually go through, and I can give it the stores I want it to go through. I can say, hey, you go put it in the stores where you think it can sell. And it's funny, is certain styles where the buyers think, oh, that store won't sell that item, it's too high price. Well, actually, it challenged our wisdom and put it in the different stores where it sold quite well. And I'll just give one anecdote, which is kind of interesting, is, our district managers said, look, don't send puffers to Florida this winter. You did last time, was a markdown, liability. We just don't sell them. Well, Select just grabbed a handful of these styles and said, no, they should go to Florida. And so, the allocators asked and says, well, let them go. Well, it turns out that those sell-throughs ended up being the highest in the company because of the tourists going to those stores. And so that's a really good example of where Select challenged conventional wisdom, and it resulted in success.
Yeah, it's enabling Lucky Brand to be proactive and use kind of predictive analytics and kind of rather than be reactive in your merchandising decisions, and then fulfillment as well. So maybe talk a little bit about that, how kind of the use of these predictive analytics has kind of changed your order fulfillment strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Using these predictive analytics, we're actually putting inventory in quantities where we normally wouldn't have done it. Before, we'd have done it more in a broad-based approach. Using these analytics, we're actually changing which styles go where and in what quantities, and we're seeing, tremendous success with this. And it's helping us actually increase our turns, which is actually quite positive. The other thing that we see in our buy module, if I talk to my planners, when they roll up and say what they think the total open to buy should be, they come really, really close to what Select says. What the differences are, if I look at geographies or if I look at depth of category, then Select, that's where it's actually modifying the buys. And so the fact that it does this, I think it gives the planners confidence because they see that they're arriving at their number, but it gives them a different viewpoint because their suggestions by category are slightly different. So this has worked well for us.
Yeah, and the partnership has worked well, so it's a great segue into my next question, Mike, in terms of, if you were going to tick off some of the primary business benefits that Lucky Brand has realized since it partnered with Select, what would those be?
Well, I would say if I look at the financial aspects, we've had a significant 7-digit gain from our fulfillment module. And so the ROI is paid for itself in spades. Just, it's in us allocating from, fulfilling from the proper stores and basically avoiding lost sales at the top volume stores and minimizing markdowns at the lower end stores. So, going through our analysis, we've seen significant gains there. And allocation, it's basically the same thing. We've seen an even greater gain there. Basically, the way we measure it is we look and we said, given our old methodology, how would we have allocated the merchandise and what were the sell-throughs on those styles? And then we looked at how Select allocated those and what the sell-throughs were. And basically, using that methodology, we see a very, very large financial benefit. But then on the efficiency side, I'm always worried when we put in new systems because, usually to me, there's kind of a life cycle. Everyone's excited, then the project starts, and then frustration sets in, and then basically then everyone sits there and feels, wow, this thing didn't deliver what it expected, right?
Yep.
Well, with Select, it was the opposite. When I went down after we went live, I spoke to our allocators, and they loved the system, and for a couple reasons. One, it was actually much more intuitive and easy to use than the old system, and the productivity increases were much greater. So we were able to actually, we had some attrition in the group. We didn't have to backfill them because we're able to allocate actually with a smaller number of staff, the same number of units to a greater degree of accuracy. And plus, when we, of course, allocations is one of those departments that we have, relatively high turnover. And given the simplicity of Select, we've been able to onboard and train people, much easier and more efficient than we did in the past.
Yeah, so you see a cost savings there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then my final question, Mike, is kind of looking ahead a little bit. You've talked about your use of predictive analytics here in terms of inventory allocation, order fulfillment. Maybe you're going to continue to make iterations there and improvements there in terms of how you're using the solution. Any other areas of the business where you feel like you can take advantage of, your use of predictive analytics?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think predictive analytics, there's two big areas where they can be used in retail. And one, which we just talked about, is supply chain. The second one is marketing. Predictive analytics loves data. And if I look at our e-commerce channel or our store channel, we're collecting a lot of data on the customer. We just launched a loyalty program last August, and we have we've incented our stores, and we have a high capture rate. So, about 60 to 70% of the transactions that occur in a store we can tie to an individual. And so what we're doing now is implementing the customer data platform. So to really take data from the e-commerce channel, from the brick and mortar channel, and then take all the customer interaction from every customer touch point. So every time a customer opens an email and clicks through to the website and abandons a shopping cart, all those items are actually being aggregated and stored in our customer data platform. And then we're using a company to go off and do segmentation with this data using machine learning, and then take those audience segments and market to them, be it via email, be it personalization on the website, be it social channels, etc. So this is a project that we're working on right now and that we're really quite excited about.
Great. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank Mike Relich of Lucky Brand for joining me today. Please check out our podcast channel page, mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. But make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. Also, please take the time to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and I look forward to you joining us on the next episode of Total Retail Talks.